Have you ever opened your mouth to speak and felt nothing come out? Not silence around you. Silence inside you. The room is still, someone is waiting. You can feel their eyes on you, expectant, patient at first, then confused. Your mind scans itself for words the way you'd search an empty room for a light switch. Hands outstretched, certain something should be there. You know language lives here somewhere. You've spoken your entire life. You've explained, argued, laughed, told stories. But now there's a delay, a void, a strange internal quiet where sentences used to form automatically. Someone asks again, softer this time, "Are you okay?" And all you can offer is a shrug, or a single syllable, or nothing at all. We're taught that losing words means nervousness, that silence equals shyness, that quiet people are simply introverts. But this is different. This is not fear of speaking. This is not choosing silence. This is when the machinery of language itself begins to fail. Psychology has a name for this collapse, Alogia, and the unsettling question isn't what it looks like, but why the human mind can remain awake, aware, and conscious, while its voice quietly erodes. Segment 1. When language starts to die. Alogia doesn't arrive like a breakdown. There's no explosion, no dramatic snap. It arrives the way fog does, gradually, almost politely. At first, answers get shorter. Conversations feel heavier, like gravity has increased slightly. Responding takes effort instead of instinct. Stories lose detail. Descriptions lose color. Emotion drains from speech until words become strictly functional, not expressive. Yes. No. I don't know. Psychology textbooks call this poverty of speech. But that phrase is misleading, because alogia isn't about having nothing to say. It's about losing the internal force that turns thought into language. The mind still generates awareness, still perceives the world clearly, still understands what's being asked, but something vital has weakened. The momentum that pushes thoughts forward into sentences. To the outside world, this can look like disinterest, coldness, even arrogance. People assume you don't care, that you're bored, that you're withholding. But internally, it's something else entirely. Patients often describe it as standing in front of a locked door, knowing something meaningful is behind it, but having no key. Historically, alogia was most closely linked to schizophrenia, particularly what clinicians call negative symptoms. Not hallucinations, not delusions, but absence. Absence of emotional expression, absence of motivation, absence of spontaneous thought. Early psychiatrists noticed something chilling. Some patients weren't chaotic, they were quiet. Too quiet. They weren't confused when spoken to. They weren't hostile or defiant. They simply didn't elaborate. Asked about childhood memories, they'd answer with dates, not feelings. Asked about relationships, they'd provide facts, not narratives. Asked how they felt, they'd pause, then shrug. It was as if language had been reduced to its most skeletal form, stripped of nuance, personality, and emotional weight. And this is what makes alogia so disturbing. Because speech is deeply tied to identity. Your words aren't just communication, they're proof that your inner world is alive, moving, reacting. When speech collapses, it feels less like muteness, and more like the mind slowly dimming its lights. Yet here's the paradox. People with alogia are not unintelligent. They're not unconscious. They're not unaware of what's happening. In many cases, they can still write, still reason internally, still follow complex ideas and conversations. The silence isn't emptiness, it's friction. Every sentence feels like dragging a heavy object uphill, possible but exhausting. Eventually the brain stops trying, and that's when language doesn't just weaken, it begins to disappear. Segment 2, the brain behind the silence. To understand alogia, you have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Language is not guaranteed. We like to believe speech is permanent, a skill once learned, never lost. But the brain doesn't work that way. Speech is a living process, constantly fueled by motivation, emotional drive, and neural energy. At the center of this process is the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, sequencing, decision-making, and initiating behavior, including speech. In people with alogia, brain scans reveal something subtle but devastating. The regions responsible for generating language aren't broken. They're underactive, like an engine running but idling too low to move the car. Neurons fire more slowly. Connections weaken. The internal push required to turn abstract thought into spoken language fades. And this is where dopamine enters the picture, not as the pleasure chemical, but as the initiation chemical. Dopamine tells the brain, This action is worth starting. When dopamine signaling is blunted, as often seen in schizophrenia, major depression, severe burnout, and even long-term stress, the mind loses its sense of urgency. Thoughts don't vanish. They stall. Patients with Alogia often report something hauntingly consistent. When asked questions, they say, "I know the answer, I just can't get to it." Speech becomes effortful, exhausting, unrewarding. Each sentence feels like work with no payoff. So, the brain does what it's biologically designed to do. It conserves energy. Silence becomes adaptive, not because the person wants it, but because the system that starts speech has gone quiet. Segment 3. A real human case. In the late 1980s, clinicians documented a patient we'll call Michael. Before his illness, Michael was described as talkative, witty, and imaginative, the kind of person who filled rooms with stories. After a prolonged psychotic episode in his mid-20s, the hallucinations subsided. The delusions faded, but something else was gone. During clinical interviews, Michael would sit upright, alert, making steady eye contact. He wasn't withdrawn. He wasn't confused, but his responses were minimal. "How was your week?" "Okay." "What did you do yesterday?" "Stayed home." No matter how open the question, the answer stayed small. Therapists tried encouragement, medication adjustments, allowing silence, asking emotionally loaded questions. Nothing worked. Then one day, a clinician asked something different. "Do you want to talk more?" Michael paused longer than usual. Then he said, "There's no pull." That phrase appears again and again in Alogia research. No pull, no momentum, no internal gravity drawing thoughts outward. Michael later explained in writing that speaking felt like pushing a stalled car alone. Possible but pointless, and slowly over time he stopped trying. This is the cruelty of Alogia. It doesn't steal awareness, it steals drive. The twist in application. Now here's where this stops being clinical and starts becoming personal. You don't need schizophrenia to experience the edges of Alogia. Have you ever been so emotionally exhausted that forming sentences felt heavy? Have you ever replied with one-word texts? Not because you were rude, but because you couldn't summon more? Have you ever sat in conversation, fully present, listening carefully, yet internally empty of expression? That's not Alogia, but it's a whisper of it. Depression can mimic its silence. Burnout can slow the brain's initiation systems. Chronic stress can numb emotional drive until language feels mechanical. Alogia reminds us of something unsettling. Your inner voice isn't infinite. It relies on energy, motivación, emotional oxygen. When those resources run low, speech thins. And if they vanish entirely, silence takes over. But Alogia opens a deeper psychological doorway. If the mind can lose its words, what else can it lose quietly? There's a condition where speech doesn't vanish. It keeps going but loses meaning. Where sentences sound normal, but reality underneath them collapses. A state where confidence remains, even as truth dissolves. And that is why you need to watch the next videos.